The confidence interval means we're finding the lower limit and the upper limit. Our formula for our confidence interval is we're taking the mean from the first thing, or the sample mean from the first thing, I should say, minus the sample mean from the second thing. That goes together. Plus or minus z sub something. And they're going to put alpha divided by 2, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then I didn't leave myself enough room to write. Square root of the standard deviation squared of 1 over n of 1 plus the standard deviation squared of 2 over the n of 2. So, the Human Resource Department of Counseling firm gives a standard creativity test to a randomly selected group of new hires every year. This year, 65 new hires took the test and scored a mean of 112.8 points with a standard deviation of 16.8. Last year, 100 new hires took the test and scored a mean of 117.2 with a standard deviation of 17.7. Assume that the population standard deviations of the test of all new hires in the current year and the test scores of all new hires in the last year can be estimated by the sample standard deviation, as the samples used were quite large. Construct a 95% confidence interval for our means, the difference of our mean test scores of new hire of the current year and the mean test score of new hires from last year. So the current is going to be my 1s, last year is going to be my 2s. Now, 95% confidence interval. If we think about that, it means that the middle is 95%. That means we're calculating the percent for each of these little sections, and that's going to give us the sub that we're going to use with our z. So, if this is 95% in the middle, we're going to do 1 minus 95%, which is 5%, right? 5% for both of these, but since I have 2 sections, I then end up dividing by 2, and that's why they give you over 2, because I have those 2 sections. So I'm going to use 0.025 in for that. This is 0.025, this is 0.025. Those are percentages. Okay? So, in my problem, sample mean 1 is my current year. The mean for the current year was 112.8, right? The mean for last year. My mean for last year my mean was 117.2. So first part of my formula, I'm taking 112.8 minus my 117.2. Plus or minus z sub 0.025. Square root of, now I've got to find my standard deviation squared for each of those, or my standard deviation. So my standard deviation 1 would be my current year's standard deviation. That was the 16.8, right? My standard deviation 2 was last year's standard deviation, which is the 17.7. I got to do N1 and N2. N1, how many people did they survey this current year? 65. Last year, 100 new hires took it. So in my formula, for the first part, I'm going to take my 16.8 squared over my 65, plus then my 17.7 squared over my 100. And then we want to try to get that into the Alice calculator the best we can. Remembering that it does have the plus or minus option, so we don't have to do two separate problems. We can just get it all punched in. Do use the parentheses around this first part like I wrote it, otherwise you won't get the correct answer. My 112.8 looks a little funny. All right. So, in parentheses, let's clear that out. And we got 112.8 minus 117.2. If it's quicker, you can type on the keyboard. Whoops, you need parentheses around that. It doesn't look like you have. 112.8 minus 117.2. Close your parenthesis. Plus or minus, which is next to the parenthesis. Right there. Then we have z sub. So we're using the subscript, yep. 0.025. Now we're going to click over to the side, yep, and then do the square root. Under my square root, I want 16.8 squared divided by 65. And then over to, oops, 65 instead of 62. Over the side, yep, plus. And then we're going to have 17.7 squared divided by my 100. And hopefully when we hit equals, we get our two answers. So you'll have to go over to the left. My first answer to two decimal places is?
9.
Was that negative?
Negative 9.76.
Negative 9.76. My upper limit?
Is 0.96.
0.96. Okay?
Mine is locked.
This is locked. It was locked down here now. Oh, what does it say there? Wrong. Try your password again. You must type that in wrong. Type it. Caps lock is not on, is it? Oh. Oh. I wonder if, try typing in quiz 1. I changed the assessment because I didn't want it in the end to have to do it, and it might have reset the password. Yep, it changed. It's reset the password to quiz 1. All right. So number 5 is going to pretty much be the same thing. If I can get to number 5. Oh, no, it's not, because number 5 is meaner. Number 5, instead of just giving you the means and the standard deviation, they're giving you a table of values. So you either would have to calculate that using the formula or use your graphing calculator. Do you remember how to find the mean and the standard deviation if you have your data on your graphing calculator? First of all, we have to put our lists in, right? So to put our list in, we hit stat first. We put 1 for edit. Clear out anything that you have in there because you don't want anything in there. And you can either do them separately or you can put the first list in list 1, the second list in list 2. I'm just going to put both my lists in at the same time. 1.7.
So put them in separate lists.
Yep, put the first list in list 1, the second list in list 2. You could do them separately and do your calculation, but you might as well put them in while you got the screen open. Let me know when you got your list in. Okay, so then we now are going to do the statistics on that. So we're going to have to do those two separately. But first of all, we'll do list one. So we're going to hit Stat, go over to Calc, and we're doing the one variable statistics, which is number 1. And we want to do the one variable statistics on list 1. List 1 is probably already in there unless you're using the older calculator, and then you got to do the shift number 1 to do L1, right? And then we're just going to calculate those one variable statistics for list 1. And we are going to write down what the mean, the standard deviation, and the number in our sample. So, on list 1, my mean
Oh my gosh.
is going to be the 3.46, right? Got that? My standard deviation one is going to be Did I not type something in right? Oh, and you have to do the standard deviation. That's why I'm looking. They gave that to me. I just have to do the mean and the n. Well, I could have done that probably faster than doing the list then. Doing my mean, I got that. My n, how many numbers did I have? 10. N says 10. And then they're going to give us the standard deviation. So I'm going to use 1.8. On the second one, same thing. If I just hit my stat button again and go to calculate, one variable statistic, but change it to list 2 instead of list 1. So you do shift 2 to get list 2 in there. Again, if we calculate that, my mean, my x bar value is going to be that top number, the 4.17. The n again is 10, it says. And then the standard deviation is going to come from the problem. They're doing 1.5 standard deviation. I didn't realize they weren't doing the standard deviation from the sample. They were doing the given standard deviation. So you could have also just added all those numbers up and then divided by 10, since there were 10 numbers on the list, and you would have come up with that same answer, hopefully. All right, now that we have those numbers, we can get to our formula. So, on our formula, we are going to do the mean from the first minus the mean from the second. So 3.46 minus our 4.17 plus or minus z sub. I have to find my confidence level. My confidence level is 95%. I'm not sure if they all use 95%. They might, but just keep in mind if they don't, we're saying 95% is in the middle and we're finding out each end. So we did 1 minus the 95%, which was 5%. We divided it by 2, so we use 0.025. If they use 95%, you're always going to use 0.025 there, right? 0.025. Then we have, square root of my standard deviation. So 1.8 squared over my n, which is 10, plus my other one was 1.5, so 1.5 squared over my n again, which is my 10. Now you need to practice putting that in there. Can you read my scribbling? Okay.
So wait, where do I put
The z sub, this is going to be the 0.025. That number here. Squared. Both of them happen to be 10 because we had 10 in our sample. So this was the standard deviation squared over n, and then the standard deviation from our problem again, which is the 1.5 there, over the 10 again, because each list had 10. This is going to go right behind this, and this is going to be z sub 0.025. So when we put that in, we're going to start with the parentheses. And put in the 3.46 minus the 4.17. Close our parentheses. Plus or minus, which is right above the 8. There you go. Then you're going to do the z sub. And that's where we use the 0.025. Okay? Behind that, so just click up a little bit, do the square root. Under, right above sort. No, not square, square root. I just said undo. So there's the square root, okay? And then under the square root, we're going to have the 1.8 squared over 10, so divided by 10. Click right behind that fraction. Oops, maybe a little bit farther in because you want it to be under the square root. There you go. Plus our 1.5 squared divided by 10. So both those fractions are under that big square root. All right, so when you hit equal, if you slide to the left, you're going to see your lower limit, and then if you slide a little bit farther over, you see your upper limit. Okay?
So this is the lower.
So my lower limit to 2 decimal places is,
-2.16.
yep, negative 2.16, and my upper limit was
0.74.
0.74. Yep.
I did not get that.
Oh, let me see what you got typed in there.
20.
Oh, I'm gonna undo so I can see what you have. Just hit undo here. Okay. Ah, see, you didn't get this up back here. You got it down there in the subscript.
Okay.
So let's just back this up.
Undo.
You can undo for a bunch. Okay, whoops, put the 5 back in. Now you have to click up higher. There you go. Now do your square root. Okay, so you had 1.8 squared. Woo.
Oh, whoops. Undo.
Squared. That one. There you go. Over, divided by 10. And then right behind that fraction, yep, 1.5 squared.
Plus?
Yep, plus 1.5 squared. Sorry about that. Squared, yep, divided by 10. Now if you hit equals, do you get those two numbers? Now we look better, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so just make sure you get out of that subscript when you do your square root. All right, number 6. Random and independent samples of 100 recent primetime airings from each of the 2 major networks have been considered. The first network aired a mean of 110.6 commercials during prime time with a standard deviation of 4.3. Second one aired a mean of 109.4 commercials with a standard deviation of 4.3. As the sample size are quite large, we want to find the the population standard deviation can be estimated, the sample standard deviation. Construct a 95% confidence interval for my mean difference. And so again, we're going to find our upper and our lower limits. This time they were nice because instead of giving us the big long list, they just told us the numbers to use. So, in our formula, we are going to take the mean from sample 1 minus the mean from sample 2. What is the mean from sample 1? 110.6. What's the mean from sample 2? 109.4. So we're going to take our 110.6 minus our 109.4, right? Plus or minus z sub. Again, they gave me 95%. I'm thinking they always might give you 95%. So if it's 95%, what are we going to use for z sub what? 0.025. And then we're going to have the square root of, and we need our standard deviation. Our standard deviation from the first sample was 4.3, and for our second sample, It's also 4.3, right? N. N for our first sample is going to be 100, right? And on our second sample, it's still 100, right? They did 100 from each of the two major networks. So for both samples, they surveyed 100 people. So we are going to have 4.3 squared over 100 plus 4.3 squared over 100, since they use the same numbers for both of them. Standard deviations were the same. The number of people I surveyed were the same from one network to the other one. Leanne, get the answer for you.
They're just too long to type in.
They're just too long to type in. Better than what I did, which was doing it all by hand with the regular calculator. All right. Did we get our lower limit and our upper limit?
0.62.
Whoops.
Oh.
It's not what I got. We got 0.62?
0.625 or 0.625?
Oh, you didn't do the squaring on your 4.3s. Did I not write them? Yes, I.
Oh, yeah.
Did you both do the same thing? Hit undo for me.
Probably.
Yep. This should be
4.3 squared.
not 4.32. Yep.
Okay.
So make those squares instead. 4.3 squared.
Oh, shit. Oh, sorry.
Oops. Did this undo if you typed something in wrong or did something?
Is it
There you go.
0.01?
That sounds better.
0.008 I have now.
So 0.008, you're going to round off to 0.1, right? If it's two decimal places.
Yeah.
Again, if you go farther than 2, it's going to be okay. It says at least 2. My upper limit's going to be 2.39. Okay. Yes, make sure that looks like a squared and not a 4.32.